What's up, Yichi here. We're going to talk about 8 things that you must know before buying here in Toronto. Let's jump right in. Number 1, sellers have to disclose the number of offers they currently have on hand. This is a good thing and it protects us as buyers. It's not like when you go to a car salesperson and express interest in buying a car and then they're like, well, actually you should buy it right now because we have a guy who just came. He's gonna buy the same car all cash, but he's not here right now. He's just picking up balloons for his daughter's birthday. You're like, okay, sure. But with real estate, it is well regulated and we have to know, or we have the right to know, how many offers there are on hand. Now you might be thinking, can't they just make up offers to kind of gas up the price? Well, no, because the brokerage must prove the existence of all offers in case they are audited. And if they get caught cheating or lying, they're in big trouble. Number 2, open bidding. This is a new legislation that has recently passed, and it also gives sellers the right to disclose the price of the offers they currently have on hand. Now, the intended goal of this legislation is to protect sellers and buyers, basically to prevent buyers from overpaying. But in the real world, it isn't really used that much. It's sort of a gray area, and keep in mind, sellers have the right to stop disclosing at any time. So don't count on this one. Number 3 is financing. The minimum amount of down payment that you need depends on the purchase price of the home and ranges between 5 or 20%. Now, the less you put down, obviously the more cash you'll have remaining, but the higher your monthly cost will be because your mortgage will be bigger, and vice versa. The more you put down, well, you're gonna use up more cash, but the good thing is your monthlies will be lower when you do close. Now, there's no right answer here as to how much you should put down. Every buyer is in a unique situation. Maybe you have a lot of cash on hand and you're willing to put a bigger down so you have lower monthlies, or maybe you don't have as much cash, you just want the property and you're willing to go with higher monthlies after. It's important to talk to a mortgage specialist who will be able to bring you up to speed and give you recommendations on how best to proceed. Number 4, conditions. This is super important because I've had offers before where we've actually had the higher price, but because we added another condition, we ended up losing out on the home. Now, why? Well, it's because conditions that we put in our offer typically benefit the buyer, us. So, for example, common conditions include inspection, financing, a status certificate if you're buying a condo, and essentially it means even after the offer has been accepted at a certain price, we as the buyer have to waive or fulfill that condition in order for that deal to be firm. If we don't waive or fulfill the condition, then the deal is actually no good anymore and we get our deposit in full. And then for the seller, it's not very good because they have to relist and they might actually not be able to sell as fast or for as much. So that's why it is extremely important to kind of know how many, or if at all, conditions you should put in your offer. Again, every situation is unique and different. It depends on the property you're buying and it depends on the market. So it's best to talk to your realtor about whether you should put conditions or not and how many. Now, when buying a home, there can be 3 different main occupancy types. The home can be vacant, the home can be owner occupied, or it could be tenant occupied. The thing you must know is if it's tenant occupied, buying that house comes with a lot of risk. So buy that house only if you absolutely must. Why is it risky? Well, it's because after the deal is firm, there must be a proper notice served to that tenant. And even after that notice is served, that tenant still has a right for a hearing from the Ontario Landlord and Tenant Board. And what if they just don't want to leave? They can say, yeah, we're gonna leave when the deal firms up, but what if they don't? There are horror stories and there are situations where the tenants refuse to leave, and that can mean waiting 6 months or even more to get a hearing, and it can be a very complicated situation. So because there's a lot of inventory out there, I would highly recommend thinking twice about buying a tenant occupied property. The tenant is extremely protected here in Ontario, and yeah, unless you absolutely need to, it would be best to look for another home. However, with this in mind, a lot of sellers will actually pay tenants to leave before listing their home. So for the seller's perspective, it is kind of costly to sell with a tenant occupied home. So if you're willing to take on the risk, you might be able to get a tenant occupied property at a small discount. More risk, more reward. So keep that in mind. Number 6, there are also 3 types of properties in terms of construction. Number 1 is resale, which means the house has already been built and it's pretty much ready to move in. Now, the pros are there's a lot of inventory and there's no complications. You just pretty much turnkey, you move in. The cons are it might have been occupied before and it might be a little older. Number 2 is an assignment transaction. This scenario is the house has pretty much been built or is in the process of being constructed, but it's not quite ready yet. So you're not actually buying the legal right for the property, you're buying the contract, the original contract between the assigner and the assignee, which is going to be just an individual or company buying from the original developer. Now the pros are you're gonna get a brand new house, probably in a brand new built up neighborhood, which is fantastic. It's probably gonna be new with tons of upgrades, things like that. But the cons are you're buying the contract. You're not buying the actual legal right for the property. And you'll have to pay for things like interim occupancy fees. There might be delays in construction. And the other con is, well, the person selling that contract is probably gonna take a bit of a profit. So you're gonna need a lot more cash on hand to be able to buy an assignment contract, because you buy the contract and then you'll have to close on the property as well. Now, the third type is pre-construction. This means you are buying the contract from the developer, and the pros are in this market, you'll probably be able to get a lot of nice incentives. You'll get a brand new house once it is eventually built, and the deposit structures are typically quite flexible. Now, the cons are I'm seeing dates as late as like 2027, 2028 as the estimated completion, because it just takes so long to build in this province and in this country. So that is the con. You'll probably have to wait for a very, very long time before that house is actually complete. So those are the 3 types of properties. Keep in mind, again, every buyer is different. Whether you're looking as a first-time home buyer or as an investment property, know what's best for you. Number 7 is the location. Now, you can always change things inside the house after you've bought them, but you can't change the location. Location is so important. And in Toronto, especially downtown, 1 block can make the biggest difference in terms of your property value. Now, we also have to keep in mind other things such as school boundaries, public transportation routes, whether other buildings are going to be built in front of us and therefore blocking our view. So it's extremely important to figure out the location and the pros and cons of it. Now, you might be thinking, I don't have any kids. I don't really care if, my property is in a good school boundary and the school is good, right? But keep in mind, when you're buying a property, it's always important to know, who am I going to sell it to in 5, 10, 15 years from now? That is a very important question that you must ask. And what are they looking for when they'll buy down the road? Well, most likely, will it be a family? If it's a family, they'll probably care about the school boundary. If you don't, parking spots are becoming way, way more rare and more valuable. So even though you may not need a parking spot, you'll be able to sell it for a lot more if you own a parking spot with that unit. There are other things to consider as well. So always keep that in mind. The location is key, and you must remember, who are you going to sell it to? Number 8 is Steele Street. Steele Street is a street running east-west across the GTA, and if you buy south of Steele Street, technically you're in the city of Toronto, and you will have to pay the land transfer tax twice, and property taxes may also be higher. They just increased property taxes by 10.5% at the beginning of the year. If you are north of Steeles, then you are technically in the York region. Now, not only are property taxes and land transfer taxes different, but there are also differences in how they are governed as well, because each one has their own elected officials. One example is if you are north of Steeles in Markham, Richmond Hill, or Vaughan, Technically, you can't have any cannabis storefronts because that's against the law. That was voted by the municipalities. There are other examples of this as well. So even though it's like, you know, there's no border or anything besides a sign, there are differences between buying properties if you go north or south of Steeles. And that's it for this video. There's lots more to know, of course, but I just wanted to give you guys a little video giving you as much detail as possible, things that I wish I knew before buying and before I got my real estate license. So hope that helped, and thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.